best way to learn is through the real life experiences that we all have had. Everyone has an interesting story to tell. And as I explained in part 1, if you haven't watched that yet, I suggest you watch that before, if possible, before this one, because I'm going to kind of pick it up. There's somebody there. I'm going to kind of pick it up where I left off. Hi, come on in. Get a seat. I'm going to pick it up where I left off more or less last time. And even if this is the first time you come into the story, you'll be able to follow it more or less. So,
got your lobelia?
No, I do have lobelia, but I also have, because see, when I talk a long time and it's dry, my lungs and bronchi get dry, and then I start getting coffee. But so I use the lobelia if that happens. But I also brought a really good echinacea tincture that I'm just kind of doing micro doses on now, because there's a lot of stuff going around, and it's just a good idea to think in terms of microdosing with echinacea or astragalus or something, just to make sure that you don't get it. And this is my vitamin C water. And I do have tea there, so I'm totally equipped. So what we're going to do today, before I told the story about how I wound up getting to the Hurricane Creek Wilderness Preserve. And now we're going to launch into the part about how the beautiful dream of having a spiritual, intentional community in the wilderness fell apart and led to me living there alone and that whole process. So where I left off last time, I had just gotten to Fayetteville, and I was going to stay over the winter. This is 98. I was going to stay over the winter in Fayetteville and keep looking for people to join our community. And I was staying in the home. Now, I have altered some of the names to protect people's identities. Some names I'm going to use that I don't need to protect those people. And so I was staying in the home of Katie and Jim, and that was, and I was being made the manager of the community, okay? So all of a sudden I'm thrust in this role of being the one that's going to make everything work. I get to Fayetteville, I'm in the home of Jim and Katie, sleeping on their couch. And I'm going to try to give you a character portrait, paint the picture of who these people turned out to be. If you can imagine now a house where Katie has something called borderline personality disorder and is on medication for that. She's on SSI, disability, because she and Jim were in a car accident that broke her back. So she's disabled to a certain extent, and they're living off of her SSI. She was a big advocate for legalization of marijuana and was a real fighter for that, to the extent that she wound up serving a prison term fighting for it. And they spent all day, he didn't have a job, neither of them did. They lived off of their SSRI, what is it called? SSI? They lived off that, and the lifestyle was one of smoking pot all day, getting up late, smoking pot all day, staying up late at night watching television. She spent her time on the easy chair crocheting, and he just kind of lounged around and grumbled and complained. They were an unhappy couple, and I stayed on the couch. When you walked into the house, they drank a lot of Coke. When you walked into the house, you had to go up the stairs, and in front of the stairs was this huge pile of Coke cans. Because what you do after you drink a Coke is you fling it out the door and let it land on that pile. So that was, to me, right away a red flag, what was going on there. They ate the standard American diet of like a lot of meat and potatoes, a lot of greasy cooking. So there was grease on the walls of the kitchen, totally covered with grease because it was never cleaned. So this is the environment now that I find myself in. I really liked Jim. I'll describe him. He was thin, wiry build, grew up in Arkansas, beautiful, long, red hair, a little scruffy bit of a beard. He had that kind of impish quality, good sense of humor, but he had anger issues, and I could understand it because his wife, Katie, disabled with borderline personality disorder. If you don't know what that is, they have a deep fear of being abandoned, and so they cling to whoever it is that they feel is their anchor, and I mean cling. So he belonged to her in a way that was very unhealthy for both of them, and there was not much he could do because try to get away at all, and it was anything could happen. These people with this disorder will even try to commit suicide to get attention of somebody that they want to keep. So he was kind of like a captive pet in that house. So I spent my time on the computer there looking for new members for the community and making the best of it and getting to know them and discovering some different kind of issues that existed. And one of the big issues was in this community that was being developed, it was supposed to be a spiritual community, whatever that means, and because it wasn't really defined, it was just like you need to have a spiritual orientation. And there were a lot of rules. Now, the last time I mentioned that Doss, the person who started the community, was kind of like the boss and had made all the rules, had Asperger's, not clinically diagnosed, but I knew a lot about it, and it was classic. And one of the things folks with Asperger's have issues with is social skills. They call it mind blindness because they can't see out of their own frame of reference. So what other people, they don't pick up on cues, you know. It's like I can tell just from looking at you if you're listening and with me on this little story time. But somebody with Asperger's wouldn't be able to do that. If you start getting antsy and wanting to do something else, they wouldn't detect that. If you start getting really angry because I said the wrong thing politically and you got your ire up, they can't detect that. So they wind up getting in all kinds of trouble. Just saying stuff that people are getting upset with. They have no clue. They just keep on and on until finally people blow up in their face and they didn't, what was it? How did that happen? So that was something that got him in a lot of trouble, and people didn't understand it, so he had a bad reputation in Fayetteville as a consequence of this. And at Katie and Jim's house, they were supposed to be his friends, but they were constantly bad-mouthing him, another bad sign. But one of the big issues that came up, he had all these rules about what was going to happen out there in the wilderness. One of the big ones was absolutely no marijuana. You may not smoke a joint. You may not bring any marijuana to the land. The reason being that in the early years when they had first arrived to start this community, somebody off in the mountains had been growing pot, and the feds came in and busted them and then came over to their place to see if they had anything. They didn't, fortunately, but it really scared Doss because they could take your property if they found anything. Mm-hmm. So to protect the property, because, you know, when you're living out in the middle of everywhere, the feds think, well, you must be a pot grower. So you're kind of setting yourself up for a raid, even if, it's totally innocent. Well, okay, so here we have Katie and Jim. Katie's gone to prison on behalf of the legalization of marijuana. And she's being told, when you come out to the wilderness, there's no pot. Now they're smoking all day, right? And they just went, no, we're not going to stop smoking pot. We're going to come out there, and we're going to live there, and we're going to build a house, and we're just going to keep on smoking pot. Well, now I'm supposed to be the manager handling things, right? And I'm going, all right, here we go, because when I would talk to Doss, it's like, absolutely not. They cannot smoke pot. But then, on the other hand, remember, Jim's the woodsman. We need him. He turns around to Jim and starts talking to Jim about the things they're going to do when we get out there. So it was kind of like, as long as nobody says anything about it, it's going to be overlooked, kind of. But Jim was up front. I'm going to smoke pot. We're going to both. And the other thing, you have to be vegetarian. Well, they were big meat eaters, so we're going to eat meat and we're going to smoke pot. Right out of the gate, we've got big issues. So, anyway, I always hope for the best. You have to do that. You have to go, okay, how can we bring out the best in these people and help them negotiate some kind of understanding? That was impossible in this situation. So that is, that's two of the characters in our story. 3, Doss, Jim, and Katie. Then we also had another person who was an old friend of Doss, who was a computer guy. A little bit on the roly-poly side, from sitting at the computer all day, and but just the sweetest guy in the world. And he was devoted to Doss and helping him get his spiritual community together, and he just had a big heart and wanted to see everybody happy. But on the other hand, he suffered from serious depression at the same time. He was saying, I want to move out there with you guys someday, but not until you can make it like a really comfy kind of environment with all the amenities. So he was on the fringes, but supportive. Then later on, we had I found a couple of people from Austin, Texas, who wanted to come out and live there. And this was Nahash and Sky. And Sky had been a television producer for public TV in Austin. Nahash was a magician. And a lot of, at this time, one of the things that was on everybody's radar was the possibility of Y2K cutting the grid off. And all of us were concerned about that. I'd been concerned about the grid long before that, just because, we could have another Carrington event from the sun, and boom, there goes the grid, and then what? Or like in California lately, hundreds of thousands of people, weeks without power. Doesn't matter if you need oxygen in your home. It's like, boom, gone. Like if, God forbid, there was some kind of major war and there was an EMP exploded over us, and then boom, all the grid gone. So I was always thinking, this grid business, we're pretty vulnerable here, and we really ought to be thinking about how to kind of shore things up for ourselves so that if and when it goes down, which you can do in a storm, right, we can function. So the Y2K was just another more icing on that particular cake. But Nahash and Sky, they were legitimately concerned. They thought it'd be a good idea to get out of Austin. And but we didn't know them. They didn't know us. I was the middle person talking and trying to explain who everybody was and speak in a way that was truthful but not discouraging. And so they didn't come out till the following spring. Then we had Another person who came out later, Jack from somewhere up north, and he was kind of an environmentalist. And then one of the big characters in the story was Frank. Now Frank was a very unusual person, and I have thought long and hard how to describe him. When I first met him, I found him through the internet, and he wanted to meet at Western Sizzler in Rogers. So Jim drives me to Western Sizzler, and there's this kind of like, he looked like he was kind of like he looked like an accountant, not to put accountants down in any way, but that office kind of look of like the polyester suit with a briefcase, nondescript looking, kind of like everyman, he just kind of short hair, kind of a little pencil mustache and glasses, standing there at the Best Western. And I looked at him and thought, oh no. Oh no, this does not look like a wilderness guy at all. So we went in and had lunch together, and he turned out to be so wonderful as far as conversation, because he was a reader. And he lived at home with his mother, and he read everything and could converse on pretty much any subject that I was interested in at depth. So we had lunch and we talked. Then at Western Sizzler they also served dinner. So we had dinner buffet after the lunch buffet, and we were still talking. And he decided that since I was the manager, he was very concerned because I did not have a briefcase. So one of the first things that he did was he went out and got me a briefcase and put all the essentials in it, the legal notepads and the rulers and the pens and all the things that I needed to do my job, and gave it to him. That was one of his first things, to make sure, let me know that he had my back. And what his intention was he had money. He wanted a place in the wilderness as an insurance policy. He was also prepper-minded. So he had stored food and he had all this stuff, and he was a little bit paranoid too, and a little bit suspicious that, were we legit? Was he getting into something over his head? Who were we? All those kind of, because he was going to put money in. Now, the way it worked, the way it was set up, it was in a trust. And you had to become a permanent member. You spent like 6 months. Then you had to give DOS $1,000, and you would become a permanent member, which entitled you to an acre of land there, and you could build a house, and you'd be given a 99-year lease on it. So for $1,000,
Yeah.
you could have an acre, and you could build a house. Very attractive. And the only you had to be voted in by the permanent members. He made me a permanent member right away without giving him any money. And he was a permanent member. Dan was a permanent member. So we all had a vote on who could be in there. Well, Frank wanted to get in the door right away before people started voting on him. And so right off the bat, he offered $1,000 to DOS, and DOS, without provisional membership, accepted it, and now he could choose the primo piece of land to build his house on, right? So he's in, permanent member. So anyway, that's how it was all set up. I spent the winter there. During the winter, Jim and I would hike in every once in a while, because we're starting to carry stuff in. And one night in, I think it was like early January, he and I hiked in. Now, to picture this unfinished cabin, it looked sort of like a giant bread box upturned on its end. It was not finished. The outside of it were these big, I guess you would call them oak slabs, but they weren't connected to each other, so there was a gap that you could see insulation through that was all frame and bugs and stuff in there. It was pole construction, so it was up off the ground. Are we okay?
We're perfectly fine. It's just that this is saying that I'm low on battery, but I'm plugged in to the grid. The grid could go out at any second, and we might have to just be sitting here in this room.
Unplug it from the phone, plug it back in.
We'll take a short
You have a
commercial
couple
break.
people watching that are really cool people.
good.
You have a girl named Heaven. She works here with me.
Oh, okay.
And you have Andy K.
Okay.
And then somebody else. Can you tell if it's plugged in?
I can't tell. Well, it'll tell you again if it's low battery.
Yeah. Okay, I apologize.
We had a little commercial break. So, where was it? Oh yeah, so Jim and I hiked in, I was describing, so you can picture these things. You get in, rugged, hard getting down there. There was an open piece of land, like was the yard, and then this tall 2-story bread box that the front of it had, it was only 2 rooms. The lower room was the kitchen, the upper room was a bedroom. There were windows that didn't open, but downstairs there were large windows, so you had plenty of light. To get in, you had to go around to the back of the house and come up a closed-in porch that was about 4 feet wide to the door. It was covered. And you go in the kitchen, and there's a table, there's a wood stove, there's a countertop with a sink that had running water, there's a table next to the door, like one of those long folding tables. Over here, on this wall, there are all the rules, and there were many rules, and one of the main ones was no marijuana, like in plastic, up there, forbidden. And then right across from you was, right next to the stove, there was a ladder that was nailed into the wall, and you climb up the ladder and there's a hole in the floor, and that's how you get up to the upstairs bedroom. Up there was empty except there were bookshelves with books in them. Good sign. And there were dishes, there were pots and pans. You could make a fire and get warm in the winter. So that's kind of the layout. So Jim and I are down there, and we're going to spend the weekend. I'm sleeping upstairs on the floor in a sleeping bag. He's sleeping in the kitchen. And during the night, I looked out the window, and I'm seeing what looked like lightning. You guys, you know that when lightning's just staying up in the sky, flashing, but there's no thunder, it's not hitting the ground, it's just that kind of look. Well, I looked out there and saw that, and I thought, oh, okay, cool. Problem was, it kept going on and on and on in the same place. And I thought, I don't think that's right. I don't think that's supposed to happen.
Next.
And so I went downstairs and woke Jim up and said, would you come outside with me? I think something's not right in the sky. And he got up and we went out there, and it wasn't right over the cabin, but right over in front of the cabin, over the yard. And it was that kind of light, but it was flashing out in a circular pattern that was, well, it was larger than this room. You know, it was pretty big, and it wasn't going anywhere. It was just staying right there. There was cloud cover. You know, how the clouds can lay low sometimes, and it just looks like a gray slate of clouds. No wind, no storm, no rain, just low gray slate of clouds as far as you could see, and this flashing round light. So we're sitting there looking at it, and I'm going, so Jim what do you think? I mean, you know, I think that has to be lightning, right? And Jim's just kind of sitting there looking at it. I don't think so. I never saw lightning do that before. And well, it's got to stop or go somewhere or something. So we just sat there and watched it. And how long has it been, Jim? Like 20 minutes? Oh, got to be half an hour. It's still there. Well, it's got to stop sometime. So we continue to sit and watch it. How long has it been now? Oh, I think maybe 40 minutes, an hour. Okay, well, you think it's lightning? I don't think so. I don't think that's lightning. You think it's a UFO? Maybe? I don't know. Now, from all the photos of UFOs I've seen, the lights on the bottom are circular, distinct spotlight type of things. This wasn't like that. It was just like kind of flashing down from the middle and then spread out to the circle. So we sat there probably a good hour going back and forth. I wish that was lightning. I don't think it is. Finally, and it was cold. Finally, we decided we're going back to bed. Whatever, you know, we couldn't figure it out. We weren't going to figure it out, and it was just going to stay there. So we don't know how long it continued. We never solved that particular mystery. But Jim and I did have further experiences that tested our credulity, coming up in just a bit. We'll get to that. So anyway, I'd already told you there were strange things that were happening there. We counted that as one of them. So finally, in the spring, it was time to start making our way in to live there. It was about March. And we had been hiking in as much stuff as we could. Nahash and Sky came in from Austin. We all went down there together. They moved into the cabin upstairs in the bedroom. And we started working on the garden. Now, one of the things about getting supplies in there that was tricky was there was an old logging road that went for many, many miles. And you could drive down from one of the towns around there was called Pelser, Sand Gap, and near there was a store that had a road that went down the mountain, and it stopped at a locked gate. The locked gate was the beginning of the wilderness. Because we had private land there, we were given a key. We were the only ones allowed to drive through there. And same with the people that lived in the Sierra Club cabin. And so you could drive down and open the gate, go in, close it and lock it, and now you had several miles on a road that was not maintained. And the Hurricane Creek, which I've already described as being well named because it was wild. Like when it was running, you saw huge trees just moving down the creek. Huge boulders like marshmallows floating on hot chocolate. And it would deposit those things on the road entrances or in the middle of where you were going to try to drive through. You had to drive through the creek 8 times as it crossed that old unmaintained logging road to get to us. And so what you wanted to do was wait till the water went down. Now you guys have seen all these videos and you know about floods and how they say don't try to drive through like even water's that deep. Don't try to drive through that. That deep of water is going to carry your car away. Well, our water was, when we had to drive through it, and except when it really dried up, and you ideally waited till then, was easily, this deep and moving. And you didn't know if you were going to hit a boulder when you're driving through, or if it was going to be dug down, or when you got to the other side, if there was going to be trees across. You didn't know what was going to happen when you went in there. So anyway, we were tired of hiking stuff down, and the river, I called it a river because it was creek to me is just not an adequate term for it. We didn't know how it was running, but one day in late March, Jim said, we're going to drive in this time and get a bunch of your stuff in there to get ready. And of course I'm going, well, you think the hurricane's down enough? It might be. Might be good enough. We'll find out. So I went with him. We opened the gate. We drive in, and I can see the water moving pretty fast. No idea how deep it was. And you have to drive a ways through. Those crossings are not close together. They're not like this. They're like way far apart. So we're driving through this first one, and I had to keep saying, breathe. Every time we went through, we didn't know what was going to happen. The water's deep. We heard about cars being washed away. By the time we got through, I don't know, the 6th or 7th one, I said, I just want to hike from now on. We finally got a load in, and that was the official start of things. There was a tiller on the property, and so Jim was able to bring gas in and fix a tiller so we could start tilling this acre-sized garden. And putting the strings out to measure everything. The garden wound up having at least 20 beds that were approximately 4 feet by 50 feet. And that was just part of the garden. There was another huge area that I left open for Three Sisters. Y'all know what that is? Where I could grow the corn and the squash and just mop the mounds. Another quarter of the garden I decided to do waffle beds. Do you guys know what waffle beds are? That part of the garden I could tell was going to be hot and dry. And of course I'm experimental. I like to try things and compare how it's going to be. The waffle bed is when you're in a hot and dry environment, you need to conserve water. Instead of having a raised bed, which can lose more water, you do the reverse. So I had these 4x4 squares that I dug out, and I put the best soil I could find on the top of it. So they were sunk down about this far from the top. And the way that works, and this is a style of agriculture that's been done where water's an issue. And so the water tends to just kind of drain down into the waffle bed and stay there for longer. So that was that section. Later I did some hugelkultur along the fence. We did put up a fence that was a big joke. Y'all know what hugelkultur is? Beautiful, beautiful stuff. I wish I could have done more of it, but what you do there is you dig a great big trench out, and then you get your logs and pieces of wood. You just gather all this wood up, and you lay the wood out in the trench, and then you cover it with leaves, or if you have composting food or whatever, and maybe some topsoil, and if you're doing human manure, you put that down there, and then you cover it up with dirt, and so it's raised up like this. What you've done is you've built this long-lasting compost pit deep in the soil. So when it rains, the water is going down there and it's being held inside this bed in that composting material. So it's like a continuous feeding type of a deal where you don't have to keep adding stuff to it. Now remember, when I was gardening there, I didn't have stuff. I had to make my own fertilizer. I didn't have equipment to do like spraying for bugs or anything like that. So I had to be creative with doing stuff. So anyway, backing up a little bit, initially I had this crazy idea that if you're living in the middle of the wilderness as a community, everybody pitches in. You know, that's why I didn't want to live alone. I thought, oh, you know, we all need to eat, right? And here's this big garden. And so we're all going to pitch in and grow the food and process the food and any of the other things that need to happen. We're all going to be doing that. And it wasn't long before I discovered that it was me. And I had just created, initially it was we all together set the garden up as this big 1 acre, that's a big garden, 1 acre. And we had set it all up, and now it's going, and we planted it, and I told you I had brought all these beautiful seeds in, and I'm going to save the seed. So it's not like you can just forget about it. Now it has to be taken care of. A 1 acre garden. And I'm still trying to build my wigwam, and still trying to get out in the forest to really learn about the plants. So to say it was a lot of work is an understatement. I could not walk home. I could hardly walk home at the end of the day. Like at the crack of dawn, I was out there working. I would keep at it till the end of the day, and then it was like literally I felt I was lame going into the cabin. Now initially Nahash was the cook, so I didn't have to do that part. Sky, she was very unhappy. She discovered that living in the wilderness was drudgery, and she was used to the fun life in Austin and you know, having an important job in entertainment and one of the things that happens when you get out in the wilderness with you guys know about the what do they call it, the biodome experiment, where they get a group of people under a dome to simulate living on Mars forever with a small group of people. How do they get along? Well, it's kind of like that. So you've got these people, and this is a motley crew, who are now all just condensed together in this wilderness area where there are no distractions. There are no movies. There's no going to get a pizza. Where it's just us all together day in and day out with a lot of drudgery and work that these people are not used to and really didn't want to do. I don't know what they were thinking. And but initially that spring it was just Nahash and Sky and myself. Frank he bought a 2.5-ton truck to start bringing supplies in, because he was going to get everything we needed to add on to that bread box cabin, to add a living room and an upstairs loft that was going to be my bedroom, and a magnificent pantry on the back of the kitchen that was super insulated. So because we didn't have refrigeration or anything in the heat of the summer, you got to try to protect the food as best you can, temperature controlled in an old-fashioned way. So he bought this 2.5-ton truck. Well, the first day he drove it in, and he hadn't driven in before. Now, and it was still, the hurricane was still running kind of high. I remember being out in the yard when he drove in, and he got out of the truck, and he just stood there with this vacant look in his eye, white as a sheet, absolutely in terror and shock. And finally, I went up and tried to talk to him, and he was just like this. Finally, I got him, to talk, and all he could say was how absolutely terrifying it was to drive that truck through those creeks. He spent a lot of money on that truck. Now, this is a 2.5-ton truck. They're high. The wheels are high. And it was still, like later on, he would talk about how he had fishes swimming on the floorboard. And so anyway, he was a courageous guy. He was very funny. He was he liked to ridicule people that he didn't understand. We heard a lot of ridicule about Doss. Very judgmental, but he made it like it was a joke. I don't know if you've been around those people who, it sounds like they're saying a joke, then it's funny and they're laughing, but what they're doing is putting you down as powerfully as they can put you down, and then they're laughing about it. You ever seen somebody like that? So you're kind of like smiling like this is supposed to be funny, but you're going, oh, not funny. And so he did a lot of that, but then he was also really genuinely funny. Like one time, another one of the rules on the wall, you're not allowed to kill the snakes. Now you can relocate the snakes, remove them off the land, but you may not kill the snakes, and we did have them. And so one day I was always out in the garden, so you'll hear that all the time. One day I was out in the garden, like there was any place else. Sometimes it was the forest. And I'm out there, and all of a sudden I hear Frank screaming at the top of his lungs, "Snake! Snake!" He had stepped on a big copperhead. And he had some kind of tool, I don't know what it was, or maybe he'd picked up a stick. And Jack was with him and saw him, and he just went into this frenzy and beat that snake to death. Well, that was against the rules. And Nahash handled it beautifully because he said, well, another one of the rules, just so you know, Frank, if you do kill a snake, you have to eat it. So the next morning for breakfast, and Nahash is the cook, he had skinned the copperhead, had the skin pinned to a board to dry nicely to use, and Frank came in for breakfast, and I guess he didn't know how serious Nahash was, but he sat down, and here are these two beautifully breaded and fried pieces of meat, and it looked great. It looked kind of like fish in a little bit, like. So he sits down, and initially he's kind of excited because there was no meat there, right? And he's got this look in his eye, wow, something special for me. And of course Nahash explains to him, well, I told you, you got to eat this. This is copperhead. And he was interesting. He did eat it, and made interesting comments through the whole meal. So there were a lot of funny episodes like that went on. Now the construction is beginning, and that's one of the reasons I didn't have any help. People were coming in to work on that. I understood that, they needed to do that. And I was out in the garden one day, and they called me and told me they needed me to help with the construction. And I said, oh, I'll just hold some boards together. I can do that. And I went out, and what was happening was, now remember, this building was already on poles, so it's up off the ground pretty high. And they had framed in this new part that was going to be the living room, and then up above that was going to be like the bedroom area. So it's pretty high. So they had the lower part framed in, and there were planks across it, and they told me what they needed me to do. Like they had built the wall, the frame of the wall that was on the ground down below, and they were going to pull it up with ropes or pulleys or something, and they needed for me to stand right on the edge of that top story and catch that wooden frame when they got it up there and pull it up just to the edge and hold it there while they nailed it down. And I said, I can't do that. And they said, oh, sure you can, sure you can. I said, oh, no way. I don't have a tool belt. And so they got me a tool belt. And I had to do it. But I told you before, the only time I got scared in the wilderness was when I had to do construction. Because I'm not good with heights anyway. And when that thing came up, and it's like I'm right on the edge, like it's just a frame, and there's a plank, and I don't know if I can hold, I mean, that was terrifying. I hated that. Anyway, that was the end of the construction except for my wigwam up. I preferred that. So anyway, now Jim and Katie were supposed to move out in September. That was the plan. Oh, meanwhile, I forgot this part. There are certain important things I have to remember. Other characters that are not human. So when I was living in Jim and Katie's house, they decided that they needed a really powerful dog in the wilderness. So they went out and got a puppy that was a Chow Rottweiler mix. Very young little tiny puppy. And at night they would just put it in the kitchen, which is right close to where I was sleeping, and block it off. And that poor little puppy would just cry and cry and cry. I couldn't stand it. So I would get up and get that little puppy and bring it to sleep on the couch with me. Needless to say, the puppy bonded with me in a big way. And when I moved out to the land, that puppy was still living in the house with Jim and Katie. And that puppy wanted to be with me, so he started causing trouble. And at one point this was a rented house, when he ate a hole through their floor, they contacted me and said, either you take him, they've named him Chewy, and either you take him out to the wilderness or we're going to get rid of him, we can't handle it. But it's still Katie's dog, right? And of course I took him, so I'm living in the tent, and now I've got this puppy who is beautiful and well behaved, no problem out there. He wanted to be with me. So that was one of the animals, stories about him throughout. Then the other thing that happened was Nahash had this great idea that we needed to have guineas. And so he one day, because they had a car up on the top of the mountain, a place called Wheeler's Knob, where you could leave a car. When you could cross the hurricane to hike up, you could get in the car and go to town and get stuff, and then you'd hike it down, right? So one day he came in with 10 little young guinea keets. They were very young, and we needed a cage. Well, there was an old rabbit cage that they put up on stilts and kind of put some stuff around it to keep the keets in, and put them in there. And I thought, well, okay, this is his business. This is Nahash going to take care of these birds. I knew nothing about guineas. I did know about birds because I used to say, people used to bring birds to me to save young birds, and it's very hard to do, and I didn't want anything to do with it. And I have to make an admission here. At the time, I did not have enough respect for the intelligence of birds. I've had always this kind of attraction to really intelligent animals, that I feel like we have a communication back and forth. So to me, birds were bird-brained, that sort of thing, and so I didn't think a real relationship with guineas was in the cards. And at any rate, so he's taking care of the guineas, and that's all fine and good. Well, another thing that happened, let's go back to Doss and his Asperger's. Now, I'll tell you, Doss passed away a few months ago. And so some of this is in memorandum of him, and I always wanted people to understand that when they, all the terrible things they heard about him, it was because people didn't know about Asperger's. They didn't know he had Asperger's. So they attributed this strange behavior to just being a bad person. So one of the things that he did as an example, you have to check yourself for ticks. And he made a big deal about that. You have to check yourself for ticks. So one day I'm sitting at the dinner table with Nahash and Sky, and we're having dinner, and he walks in from outside. He was visiting back and forth. He was there, and he walks in, he was kind of a big guy, overweight, kind of chubby guy. And he pulls down his pants and bends over and sticks his rear end in Sky's face and says, "Do you see any ticks?" I mean, gotta check for ticks, right? No social skills. You do not do that at the dinner table. And also, you ask. You say, would you be willing to check for ticks? And you don't point your rear end to the wife. He could have done it, showing Nahash the rear end and said, would you check? No. Rear end in her face, do you see any ticks? There's levels of silence. People with Asperger's don't pick up on that, but there are levels of silence. So the silence that settled over the dining room table was the kind of silence that says, oh, things have just gone terribly wrong. And as manager, how am I going to deal with this now? So that was the first sign that Sky and Nahash may not last. Now, but they made it through the summer. And another thing about dogs, some people are collectors. Do any of you like to collect anything, like figurines or stamps, or do you know that collecting kind of passion? It's like an obsession that you've got to have every kind of little cow statue, cow pictures on. People get that kind of a thing, and I've never really understood it, but I try to accept it. And with Doss, he was a collector of guns. He loved guns. I mean, there were some guns he didn't have yet, and so if there was a gun he didn't have yet, that was like, oh, gotta get that one. So there were quite a few guns on the land. And we all understood out in the wilderness, okay, you might need a gun to, something could happen. You might have to shoot a cougar that's eating your little kid or whatever. So we understood that. But it seemed like, and we didn't know how many guns were there, but we started to suspect that maybe there were too many. And one of the things that gave it away was there was a big shed area where he had been collecting things for over 20 years, just filled with stuff. And there were these huge, I think, there must have been at least 50 5-gallon buckets full of ammunition. And so we started thinking maybe there's really a lot of guns here. And it kind of worried us because have you guys heard of Tim Ernst? He's got these beautiful books of nature. He did one on the hurricane. He said that the hurricane wilderness was his favorite wilderness. But he also did a little tourist guidebook to the Highland Trail where he talked about the different places that go along. And in it, and he did it a long time ago during that original attempt that Doss had made years and years and years ago, when Doss kind of thought of himself as like a guru because he was doing a spiritual community, and he thought he knew what everybody needed to know, and so Tim Ernst, when he wrote about the Valley of Light in that guidebook, was very disparaging. He said that it was a cult, these were the followers of a guru who were like end of the worlders there because of worries about nuclear war. And first of all, we didn't relate to that at all, and we were definitely not followers of Doss. I mean, it was that is not us, everybody, please. But then we started thinking, what if they learn about all these guns? They've read that, and now they know there's all these guns here. And are we getting set up for like a David Koresh kind of a deal here where, people might come in blazing thinking that we're some kind of like terrible survival cult or something like that. So we were concerned. And so one day towards the end of the summer, we were sitting out, we always sat under the trees. That first summer, it was so hot, we had a thermometer that went up to 120 in the sun. In the shade, it went down to 115. We spent a lot of time under the trees. And we were under a tree, Nahash and Sky and I, when the creek was way down so you could drive in. And in comes Das driving in, he gets out, and he's so excited. He can't wait to show us what he's brought. And so we're all cheerful, like, oh, let's see what he's brought us. And he opens up the van, and he starts bringing out all these guns. And another level of silence was discovered. Nahash and Sky just sat there. And anybody could have seen on our faces that we were not as thrilled. And he kept bringing them out and showing them, look at this act, look at this part. This is a we didn't always talk about these guns kept coming out of the van. And we're just like, oh my God. Well, it wasn't shortly after that Nahash and Sky decided that they weren't going to leave. And Frank thought they were still there and they were going to help with this construction. So he's bringing all this wood in, and he discovers that they're leaving. And now who's going to help? And it's just Jim and Frank. So there was, things were already getting a little bit weird. Anyway, so let's see, where are we? We're in October that first year. The kids are getting older. Okay, now Nahash has left and I have the birds. So I'm going to just shift gears a little bit and tell you about guineas, because I have an amazing respect for them. They're considered sacred in South Africa, where they're from. And so we're going to skip some of the other stuff that happened with people. We'll come back to it later, but I have to make sure we get the guineas in here. So now these birds are starting to need to fly. They're in a rabbit cage. Jim made a beautiful big pen for them where there was a part that had a roost where they'd be protected in the winter, and then a wired run for them to be in. And of course you want to put them up at night because of predators. So you let them out in the day and you let them run around, and then you just put them up at night, right? And have any of you had guineas? You don't know what fun it is putting them up at night. And they like to run, right? They don't like to fly. They run, and they run fast. So that was our sport. And so at the end of the day, what you do is you have two long sticks. And initially, Katie and Jim just wanted me to put the guineas up. And I tried. Sometimes I could get them in. But there was always one or two that had a good time with me and would just run around all over, and you couldn't catch us. So we'd all have to get out. That was like our bonding time with each other, was getting the guineas in at night. So these birds now they're able to fly, and I'm trying to appreciate them. I still don't have a full appreciation yet, and I'm taking care of them the best I know how. So the winter passes. In the spring, now they're going to start mating, and because we were doing all this construction, Frank had brought in all these windows. He'd gotten a deal on windows. And so we didn't have any place to put them, so we just had these beautiful framed windows leaning up against trees all over the place. And in the spring, when these young birds starting to kind of get a sense that love was in the air, and they were looking for love, they would discover their reflections in these windows. And it seemed like it was they had their combs hadn't fully developed. I couldn't quite tell male and female yet, but I kind of figured I was mostly the females, and they would snuggle up kind of coyly against the window and bat eyes at themselves. They go like this and like this, and they just stay there by the window. And finally, they kind of got the idea. I think the males were the ones that got the idea first. And the males introduced them to concepts that there was more to love than that. And so they mated. And the way they do their nest is they go out in the bush. You're just in time for the part about the guineas, but I was hoping you would have a guinea suit on.
Oh, sorry.
But that's okay. You're dressed fine.
Failed.
Did I tell you about the guineas before?
A little bit.
Okay. So we're just getting into it. I just explained how the guineas initially fell in love with their reflections in the window. And now they're discovering real, true love. And so they started mating, and when it was time to lay their eggs, what they do is they go find a nice bush, and they lay their eggs out in the bush. And they like to have 2 or 3 hens in each nest. And so at a certain point when they're sitting on the eggs, you've got 2 or 3 hens in the nest, and they just stay there, and they're kind of looking out after each other. The ones that aren't nesting, they're the ones that are kind of like the social services. And what they do is they know where all the nests are, and they go around in kind of like a routine way from nest to nest, and they check in, is everything okay here, and you doing okay? And then when they're happy and content with that, they go find the next nest, and they all go up there and they check, are you okay? And hang around, visit a little bit, get caught up on the gossip. Then off to I think there were 3 or 4 nests that first year. And they do that thing, and they would, throughout the day, they would make the rounds checking on everybody. So finally, the eggs hatched, and it was still cold. It was in the spring, and it was still cold. And it was up the first time. And so what they do is, like, they'll let a bunch of the eggs hatch, and when they feel like they have enough, they just get up and leave. And so if there's eggs that haven't hatched yet, they're on their own. And so the first nest I checked on, there was 1 egg still in the nest when those birds got up and left, and I didn't know what was going on, so I picked the egg up and I kind of cracked it a little bit and looked inside, and there was a bird in there, but it wasn't moving, and I thought, oh, this one's probably dead. And so I put it down on the ground, and next day when I came out, this was on the way to the garden, I heard this cheeping sound right there, and it was cold, and that little bird came out of the egg and was by itself all night in the cold, and it was still alive. And I tried to reunite it with its little mother flock. They would have nothing to do with it. And so I went, guess I have a bird. What am I going to do with this little bird? There was no facility for keeping it warm at night. At that time of year, you don't keep a fire going in the cabin. It gets too hot. And it got cold in there. There was no warm place to keep this little bird. Well, it was that same day I started finding other abandoned little chicks in this other nest. And so I gathered them all up, and I had, I think, about 6 of them now, and that I was going to have to take care of, not knowing anything really about what to do. And just to back up a second, there was a leader of that flock who was a female, very loud. Have you all heard guineas? They're very loud. And this leader of the flock was the loudest one of all, and she was constantly yelling at them, issuing directions, telling them this and that. And so I named her Martha. and I named the flock the Vandals. And so it was Martha and the Vandals. That was the name of the flock. And so now I realized I'm going to have my own little flock here because they weren't going to be accepted by the other birds. So now we're going to have 2 flocks, and I've got these babies, and they, of course, were going to bond to me, and I had to think of names for them. So they became the Shananas. And so what I decided to do, and they're little, tiny, cute little birds. So what I decided to do to keep them warm at night was I made a little kind of nest thing for them. And I put them in the nest, and I stuck it under my arm and went to bed. And they slept in bed with me, and they just stayed there all cuddled up, well behaved, all warm and quiet. And I don't move that much at night anyway, so we just all stayed in bed. And I had a thermos that way I would make my coffee, and so the first thing in the morning I could just pour it out and have something hot to drink first thing, and I'd get up early anyway. So I'd pour my coffee, and it'd be a hot mug, and the little birds would get up, and they'd lean up, all of the little birds around the cup, just and so we were getting it all figured out, right? Now, of course, they thought I was mom, and that meant they had to be with me every single moment. The minute they couldn't see me, they went into panic, screaming. And of course, that's what they do in nature. You know, if they get separated, they got to call their mom to find them. So now these little birds are with me all the time, and I'm out in the garden with them, trying not to step on them. They're running their little tiny feet after me everywhere I go. And somehow, you know, I managed to keep them alive. And what I decided, I was going to put those birds to work because, you know, isn't this supposed to be a community effort? All hands on deck. I had these little birds, and they were the only ones going to help me in the garden. So one of the problems that I had in the garden was trying to grow things like cabbages that get eaten up with cabbage worms. Have y'all tried to grow cabbages and kale? And the cabbage worms are a nightmare. I was constantly battling those things. And so I thought, these little birds could be vacuum cleaners. And so I would take a little bird in each hand, and just hold it up along the cabbages, and they would grab all the little cabbage worms and eat them. And we would go like that down the row of cabbages. And they would get fed, and they loved it, and they could see them right away. All I had to do was just hold them in my hands and go like that. And they're eating all the worms off the cabbages. And one of the problems, there are, and you guys probably know about this, when you're gardening in Arkansas and you have plants that have big leaves, you better check under those leaves before you reach under there, because the chance of there being a coiled up snake under there is pretty high. And I did that, you know, I knew that. And I had a lot of snakes in my garden, and that's another story how they became allies. But this one, a little keep, ran under a leaf and came out just paralyzed and flopped over dead. And I knew, thank goodness, because I wasn't thinking I had these babies. I was just going to reach under the cucumber. And that keep went under first and got it. So that reminded me, awareness in the wilderness, folks. Man, what an awareness practice. You have to be aware every moment. There is no daydreaming. There is no, chewing things around in the mind. What a mindfulness meditation. Every step you want to see where you're stepping. Is it on a snake, or is it on a frog, or is it on a valuable plant? When you put your hand on the chair, is there a wasp there? Is there a wasp there? You know, sit down, look at the chair before you sit down. Finally, when you finally are able to sit down, now you could kind of go, all right, now I can daydream a little bit, but you're still having that awareness of everything around you all the time. So anyway, the Keats helped me with that awareness because, for one thing, they're constantly running under my feet, and I was looking out for them. So anyway, I had this brilliant idea. You know, I used to have a Montessori school many years before, and I thought I got to do something to get some free time away from these Keats. So maybe if I build them a Montessori school, they'll be so entertained and happy and have so much fun, I can get a recess from these little birds to do something. So I built this beautiful little Montessori school. It was like a wood about that high, and it had a screen on the top. And inside the Montessori school, I built little slides, and there were mirrors, and there were little mountains to climb and little ponds, and all kinds of really, really fun things for little birds. And I put all the little birds in there and watched them, and they loved it. They were exploring and going in tubes, you know, to go in and out of. They loved it. And I stood up and walked away happy, and then all of a sudden panic. They were only happy as long as they saw me sitting there looking down at them to see if they were okay. So that didn't really work. And so moving ahead to the next year, what was it that same year? It might have been it was that same year. Oh yeah, the Sean on Oz, one of the birds, there was Mojo, Shabab Shabab. Shabab Shabab was the first one that I'd found. That was his name. Mojo and Isis, and there was Ditzy. Now, Ditzy had a neurological problem. He couldn't, like the food's there, his beak's going here, and his head's kind of cockeyed, and he kind of walks in circles like he's trying to follow us as hard as he could, but he's kind of walking around in a circle, and he can't quite tell where we are. So he was a real problem child, and I had to put him in a dish of food so that wherever he put his head, he could find something to eat. And as we're going through the garden, I'm always having to watch him and pick him up and bring him over to where we are. And obviously he wouldn't have survived without me. And so one of he had a special gift. This just goes to show you. And his special gift made him famous. We had a boom box, and Jim liked to play hard rock music on that boom box. And this is when Ditzy, he'd gotten his wings, and he was like an adult-looking guinea, but his head's kind of like this all the time. When he heard that music, he got it right away. And he started dancing to the beat of music. Little bit faster, twirl. You know, and he totally in time with the music. Turn the music off and he's just... And so we had Ditzy the Dancing Chicken, is what I called it. And I had this great big idea. I was trying to think of ways to make some money down there. And I thought, well, you know, when you go traveling, you see these signs on the road that say, stop here and see. There's some kind of quirky thing that they have on the sign. And I thought, okay, we're going to put signs up. I'm the manager, so we can do these things, right? I had all the great ideas. There's the Highland Trail up there. Let's put signs along the Highland Trail that say, 1 hour from Ditzy the Dancing Chicken. You're half an hour from dancing Ditzy the Dancing Chicken. Getting closer and closer now. Down this way to Ditzy the Dancing Chicken. Some people didn't like my ideas, and so that would never happen. But what did happen was that year there was the big ice storm. Remember that huge ice storm, 2001, I think?
Mm-hmm.
And there was the Arkansas Gazette, I think it was, wanted to do a story on people who just lived without electricity anyway, and they found out about us. This Jim and Katie and I were still there. And so they sent a reporter. They contacted us through the people in town and arranged to send a reporter down to do a story on us that was on the front page of the Arkansas Gazette, I think it was. And the front page photo was of Ditzy, the dancing chicken. That was a big hit when we showed her what he could do. So he was a real love. Now, another thing that happened, like, first of all, did you know that guineas have a sophisticated language, a verbal language? I didn't either, but I learned it. It's like it started by learning to understand the Keats, because they have their own baby talk. And I started to understand what they were saying. When I told you before what the presence had told me about observe, listen, do. So I was doing that all the time. I'm really watching and listening to these birds. And I'm noticing the difference in the way that they talk when they're doing different things, and that they have different words. And so I started to understand the children and the adults and the conversations that were going on around them. It was very sophisticated, and they had words for things like snake, and they could tell the difference between a poisonous snake and when it wasn't poisonous. So they would all gather around a snake, and they would check it out, and they'd talk about it and discuss what should we do with this snake. And if they thought the snake was poisonous, they would stamp it to death and peck it to death and kill it. If they thought that the snake was harmless, they would just leave it alone. Another conversation they had was, what are we going to do about those mice that are coming into our cage and eating our guinea food? And it was probably Martha this was Martha and the Vandals. Their issue was mice going in their cage and eating their guinea food. I'm sure it was Martha that came up with a solution. Let's just stomp them flat. Now, I couldn't figure out at first what was happening, but as I was walking around, I'm going, what are all these flat mice? There's all these flat mice all over. And finally, I kind of started noticing there's more and more flat mice as you get closer and closer to the guinea cage. I never caught them at it, but I know that they were stomping the mice down flat. So let me just say, I'm starting to respect these guineas quite a bit more, and I learned that the Shauna and Oz could not mix with Martha and the Vandals, because the Vandals would beat up the Shauna and Oz, and because they were all young. I was the only mother. Like the other ones, they had bird mothers that would protect them. I was not a bird mother, and so these poor little babies of mine didn't have a good role model. They didn't know how to do all the right things in the right way. And anyway, this first year, there's one of the things that happened was there was one of the Vandals who had gone out, and she was nesting by herself. And one day she came out of her nest, and her eyes were swollen out and popping out of her head, and there was a snake bite on the top of her head, and she'd been bit by a copperhead on her nest, and she was blind. What are you going to do with that bird? It was terrifying. It was horrible. I had no idea. So the best I could do was put her in one of those rabbit cages and put food out, and hopefully she could find it, and just wonder. Well, she was in the cage, and I noticed that her mate was coming around and spending a lot of time talking to her and encouraging her and just trying to lift her spirits up. And I thought, well, maybe I should let her out and just watch and see what happens. So I let her out, and he understood she was blind, and he led her around and led her to where the food was. He led her to where the water was. He stayed with her and watched over her, and when she was walking around and needed to know where to go, he was right there kind of directing her, and he was like a seeing eye dog for her. And eventually, it took, I don't know, maybe a week, her eyesight came back, and she was healed, and she was fine. So their relationships are really beautiful and tight and just very interesting. So anyway, my birds, the Sha-na-nas, grew up. The next year when it was mating time, we were going to have a problem because we had Mojo, Ditzy, forget about him. We had Mojo and Shabop, and Isis was the only female. So there was now a competition to see who was going to get to mate with Isis. And another thing that happens when I told you about the ritual of going around to check on the nests, right? So anyway, Shabop won out and mated with Isis, and they had a nest. Mojo was left out and very upset about it. Now, I was the bird that had to go check on the nest all the time and do all that ritual. Another thing that happens is after their keets hatch, they have to introduce them to the rest of the flock, and the flock gathers around and decides whether those keets live or die. And there's this whole ritual, like the hen, when she's like she waits, and then she brings her little keets up to the whole rest of the flock and introduces them, and here they are, you guys. And then she bows down to them, and she bows in a submissive pose, like, please let these babies live, and she keeps bowing down to them, and they're in judgment, and they make a decision. Do they live or die? And if they don't like them, they kill them. And if they like her way she deports herself, they'll let them live. So then I watched all that, and I saw how this all works, and I thought, how am I going to do that? You know, when she has her little keets, when Isis has her keets, she's going to have to bring them out and she's going to have to introduce them to these other birds. And it's like, how's this all going to work? So anyway, that was very traumatic. She did it, and there was battles going on between Mojo and Shabop. Finally, Mojo got Isis back, and Shabop was heartbroken, and he would climb up in my lap. I'd be sitting out in the garden under the tree, and he would climb up in my lap and lay his long neck over my arm like this, and just lay there, sad and crying and depressed. So their emotional life was fantastic. Now, what happened eventually, wild animals discovered them and they started getting killed off. So at one point I had 30 of them. It went down, over the years, down to only 3 birds. And, but those 3 last birds, those 3 survivors, one day I was sitting out under the tree when a new bear came into the yard. And those 3 guineas chased that bear out of the yard so fast. Boom, out it goes. Okay, let's take a little break. And then we'll come back and continue. Are y'all still with me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, there was one more thing I had to say about the guineas.
Are we all back?
Okay, yeah. Okay, we're going to finish the guinea part of the story. There is much, there's 2 things left. And then we're going to go back to the people part of the story. What time is it?
It's 4:50.
Really? 4:50?
Well, it was 4:46 a moment ago, so it's about
Oh
4:50.
man, well, okay, we still
Right,
have a
what
lot
time is it
more and
today?
we're not going to get through today. So.
4:49.
Okay, so there's going to be a part 3 for sure. Woo! Anyway, so a couple of things about the guineas. People like the idea of having guineas in the garden because they eat ticks and they have to keep the bugs down and all that kind of thing. And they don't scratch like chickens do. And there are a lot of good things about guineas in the garden, except this. And it may just be my relationship was so close to them, it became really close to them, that they had an eagle eye on everything I was doing. And if I touched a plant, then it must be good for them to touch the plant. So whatever they saw me touching, they would chow down on anything. They ate all kinds of stuff that I don't think they normally would, and it was a real problem. So I had to try to sneak out to the garden to harvest when my guineas weren't looking. And then there was one other thing. Okay, this is a beautiful part of the story too. So I had become very, as you can understand, very emotionally close to these birds, especially the Shawananas, and especially Shabop because he was my first one. And we all had we had a beautiful relationship. Well, one day somebody had driven in and they ran over Shabop. And I was heartbroken. And I went out to the garden. And what I do when I'm heartbroken and grieving is I go into it full tilt. It's like I'm not going to put it off. I'm going to devote my time to grieving until it's over. And so if I had a job, I wouldn't go to work. I mean, really, that's all I'm going to do is grieving time. That's what I'm doing. And so I went out to the garden to grieve, and I was kind of leaning up against this fence and starting to grieve big time. And these two hummingbirds, a male and female hummingbird, I guess they were a couple, flew over. And the male hummingbird landed on the fence right by my elbow here. And his mate landed on the fence right by this elbow here. And they just stayed on the fence with me while I was grieving to lend me moral support and just to remind me. Hummingbirds are anyway kind of an ally of mine. Just to give me that little lift of like, they're still alive, they're still spirit, there's, it's okay to grieve. We understand, we grieve too, and the other birds were grieving about Shabop. They really had strong emotional lives. So anyway, that's warning is be careful in the garden if you're close to your birds because they will eat your stuff if you eat your stuff. Okay, so moving back, we don't have much time. Where am I going to leave this up? I believe get a good cliffhanger. Right?
That makes sense.
Oh, here's a good one. This is where things really went wrong with Jim and Katie and myself. So right during that first winter, it was just Jim and Katie and me living there. Other people were kind of coming and going. Nahash and Sky had totally gone out of the picture. And Jack also was somewhere. And so one of the things that they were really, really worried about was how to come up with their $1,000 so that they could get their land and build their house. That's what they were there for, to have that land and to have that house. It wasn't really about the community. It was about a cheap way to get land and a house, right? But they had to come up with $1,000. Now she was getting SSI. And the spirits had been talking to me for a while, if you want to call it spirits, the plant intelligence, whatever, the presence had started to teach me about what plants are good for what. So I was already I haven't gotten into that part too much yet, but I will. I was already starting to get that direct communication with the plants saying, we're good, we'll help with this or that. And one of the problems that Katie had was that she had, besides the broken back, and I guess there was metal in there or something, she had spinal degeneration, and that's why she was on other drugs besides the psych drugs. And she was on the SSI. By the way, when she went to the wilderness, she dropped all those drugs and just kept this SSI. And so anyway, I got this, whatever you want to call it, saying there was a type of grass that was growing there, and I got this direction. It looked a little bit like wild oats, but it wasn't. To make a tincture out of the grass and give that to her, and that it would heal her back. It would stop the spinal degeneration. And so I did that, and I gave her the tincture. And she was taking it for several months conscientiously, and then she had to go into Fayetteville to see her doctor. She had regular checkups on it. When she came back from Fayetteville, she said, I can't take that stuff anymore. And I said, why? She said, the doctor said that the spinal degeneration in my spine has stopped. I'm going to lose my disability. Yeah, and I think that is a really interesting way in the world of people who stay sick to keep the money coming in. Something to think about. But anyway, there's more. I have to get to the cliffhanger, right? Anyway, so the big concern was, how do we come up with $1,000? She's getting the SSI. She gets $500 a month and no expenses. They were always going out to get, you had to have cases and cases of Coke. Because you never knew when you could get out again. So constantly bringing in Coke, and they were meat eaters, but you can bring meat in, no refrigeration, so it was like cans of meat stew and tuna and all that. We had tons of cans piling up, and lots of craft supplies. So I don't know where her money was going, but she didn't seem to think she could save money to get their $1,000. And they were very, very stressed out about it. Well, you remember I told you in the first video about how I had learned about masterminding from Dr. Kaspari, and I haven't told you all the stories about what happened with that process. There's other stories that are quite remarkable, but it was part of what enabled me to get to the wilderness, with things just falling into place. And so I said to her, and I had spent a lot of time with them trying to lift them out of their doldrums and help them find new ways of thinking and approaching life, and let's just reframe things and lighten it up, folks. And it seemed like progress was being made, where they were starting to just kind of have a brighter outlook on things. And I said, well, I can teach you guys how to mastermind, and we could do some masterminding together, and maybe that would bring you the $1,000. So that's the cliffhanger. Let's see what happens.
Are you open to questions? Can people ask you questions?
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that part. Yes, please.
Looks like you have a question right over there. Freedom has a question for you.
Were there any wild hogs out there?
I think there were, but I never saw them. They never came around. Okay. One of the advantages, I forgot to mention this, living where we were in such a huge wilderness, is that all of the wild animals had plenty of space. They didn't need to be around us. Even the bears, it wasn't like there was encroachment where they were being pushed into human civilization. They had their own free territory. Why hang out with people? But there's another cliffhanger. But that's going to be another time. So anyway, I heard that there were, but I never saw any sign of them. thankfully.
What was the grass?
Oh yeah.
You know, I
that's
never,
really
I never found out. I didn't have very good plant identification books with me. You know, and I was still learning. Learned a lot with the books that I had, and later on, I'll tell you about how I was able to learn a whole lot more. Not this time, but I never was able to identify that grass. It was tall. It looked a lot like wild oats, but not wild oats. And it may have been special for her because, you know, that's kind of how it works out there. It's like the plants know what's going on, and they can, if you're listening and paying attention and asking, they can kind of pop out and go, "Oh, I've got an answer for this." And you know, you kind of have to have some trust in that communication and go, "Let's check it out." You also want to have some education to verify that it's not a toxic plant that you're just kind of like going off the deep end with. But yeah, so what?
This is something he's always worried about.
going off the deep
Of
end.
me going off. It's fine. No, it's fine. It said it's fine.
Oh well.
I'm fine. It's not toxic. So if you didn't know what plant it was, you must have had an inkling that it wasn't a toxic one.
Well, I was going with the presence.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what I was saying with the presence. When the presence spoke, I listened and did. And if it said, "Do this with this plant," I did. Because I could tell it was where that message was coming from. And that it wasn't my imagination.
How can you tell where it's coming from?
Everybody always wants to know that.
Well, see if that's my question.
Okay. The sensation, there's a sensation that's completely different from what's happening when you're thinking or imagining or dreaming. And it's in the body, and a lot of people have talked about it as a download. You know, when people talk about how they get this information, channel this, do that, and stuff like that. And you've had that kind of experience, haven't you, Jody?
A lot.
Where all of a sudden it's like you don't know something, and then all of a sudden you do know. You know, you're going along, you have no idea, and then all of a sudden, I know now. And when we know something, it's very interesting how it feels in us, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's very different. It's like very different from thinking or wondering or anything like that. We could be wrong, but there's a feeling of knowingness that has a certain quality of certainty to it that feels embodied almost. Now, I have to tell you, and we're probably going to talk about this at the round table a little bit tonight, but this whole new thing that I'm really into, you know, I'm always learning, pushing the boundaries, learning the new science and all that. But there is this incredible explosion of science that is verifying that consciousness is primary and that everything's cognitive, and that in fact there's this whole new branch. Neo-Darwinism is out. Forget Neo-Darwinism. Now it's about cognitive evolution, and that every cell in our body is actually a cognitive agent and has its own self-reference in what's called information space. And every cell in the body apprehends and understands its environment, does problem solving, communicates back and forth, is listening to all the chatter that's going on, and is able to filter things out according to what it particularly needs at that time. And so understanding that, and in the database, you guys all really ought to subscribe to the Herbal database because it's everything that you're interested in. In the database now, I've been expanding the section on evolution into the holobiont and the hologenon. do you know about the hologenome and the holobiont? Well, that's what we are now. We used to be humans, but now we're holobionts. And that's because they understand that there's only a small portion of our cells that are actually human, and that most of the cells in our body and our genetics are primarily bacteria, but there's even more viral in there. And so that whole community of what we are as beings, as entities, is being now termed the holobiont. And all living things are holobionts because they're all a conglomerate of their own unique type of genetic species cell and all these other things that are making them up. And so as you get into that further and further, and there's a big section in the database on plant communication and plant intelligence, and it kind of all blends in with this opening, emerging field in quantum biology, where we're starting to understand a little bit how all this communication business works, and we're all living in this information space is what is being termed. And they're starting to understand how communication is being sent between all these different kind of cells. There's constant chatter going on, and how we're filtering out according to what we need. So anyway, that's not a cliffhanger, but it is my sales pitch for all of you guys to sign up for the Herbal database, because it's fascinating, and I think it helps us, when we think, how can anybody know that? Is that true? How can a plant talk to you? How, that just seems like crazy talk. But as you get into this part of it, when we start to understand, scientists are starting to understand this conversation that's going on all the time that we're not aware of with each other. Like my cells right now are talking to your cells, and back and forth through the DNA, which is a sender and receiver. Little black hole getting to Dan Willer. Every DNA spiral has a little teeny tiny black hole in the middle of it. And there's transmission going out back and forth, sending information. That's part of what the nature's broadband is based on. So it's just incredible what's going on out there. And we've known it for a long time. We have a sense of it. And so when we know it, it's like every cell in your body just got the message. Every cell, including your human cells, but also your bacterial cells, the viruses, the parasites, because it's all community, that they're all in hopefully harmony with each other, and they're all paying attention to what the message is. And when they get it from a plant, because plant's talking to them, they go, oh, okay, or wherever. It's like all of this unity, this message was sent through, they all got it. You feel it in your body as knowing. It's not just up here. So anyway, that's my little end of talk. Thank you guys for coming. I hope you come again. Join us. We're not going to meet next month because, there's too much craziness going on. And when you can't, subscribe to the YouTube channel, Ozark Herbal Academy YouTube channel, because I do a lot of videos on all kinds of things. We didn't mention we have to give a thanks to Birthsong Botanicals for putting this on. It's not an easy thing to pull all this together, and that's really wonderful for you both to have done that for us. And we have to give a thanks to Jody for being my transportation. And so, and it just, we're just grateful all around that we've got such beautiful people to hang out with, huh?
Yeah. Yay.
So we're going to say goodbye now and close this off. And then we're going to get ready for the next phase. We have a long day. We have the Herbal Round Table starting at 6. Yes, at 6.